in the infinite dark void, all energy, all space-time were condensed at one point, the cosmic egg. And this cosmic egg, for a reason we'll never know, exploded. And it exploded evenly in all directions, and the energy went out in the form of light radiation, photons. Gradually, stable particles were formed, protons, neutrons, and gases began to form. Helium and hydrogen gas were formed. And the gases condensed into stars with heavier elements forming in their cores. And the stars were condensing into galaxies, into clusters of spiral and other galaxies. And as the stars aged, they turned into red giants. And in dying, they would explode, scattering cosmic dust through the universe. And this cosmic dust containing heavier elements would condense again into clouds and new stars and planets. So that the same substance is recirculating, and there is nothing new. Only the forms change. And the atoms from distant galaxies are found in the atoms of our Earth, and therefore in our own physical bodies. So this is the hologram to which we belong and of which we are a part, an inseparable part. And so now I will look at Ben's model of the universe, which he developed having looked at this existing theory of the Big Bang, and which he modified somewhat because what he saw was a different kind of bang, a continuous, modest bang. In the 60s, new celestial bodies were discovered, and they were called quasars. These were radio galaxies of enormous size, the oldest galaxies, the oldest celestial bodies ever observed. And many of them showed a jet emerging from the center and shooting out. These galaxies are the most distant objects ever observed in the universe, and they're the fastest object moving. Here we see the jet emerging. And as I mentioned before, Ben was a great believer in the analogy of the micro level reflecting the macro level. And based on the evidence produced by the quasars, he came up with this model of the universe. What Ben was saying is that actually this is a prototype of what happened in the beginning of the universe, and that the quasars are the chips off the old block, and that cosmic egg, instead of expanding evenly in all directions, or isotropically as it's called, it actually was an explosion in one direction, like a balloon pricked with a needle. And what would happen if you had a jet emerge from this original cosmic egg? There was nothing around it. It was the only thing in that vast void. So this jet would be pulled back in upon itself by this gravitational mass. It would be analogous to holding up a water hose, and the water would eventually fall down and then rise again, and this would be the current that would be established. So it would be a continuous bang, a modest but a continuous bang. Quasars were observed to be not evenly distributed in the observable universe. The observable universe is what we see through our telescopes. If this is our Earth, then this is the radius of the distance where we can make our observations through the existing telescopes. Quasars were observed moving faster and being further away in the North Galactic Pole. And in the South Galactic Pole, they were more concentrated and slightly off the true pole by about 30 degrees. So when Ben looked at that, he realized that there was anisotropy. In other words, there was an uneven distribution of quasars. This was an element that somehow contradicted or brought in a new element into the Big Bang theory. And this is what he developed as his own. So this would be the structure then. This is the core of the structure, which is called torus, T-O-R-U-S, a melon-like structure. And matter emerges from the center in the same sequence as we saw before, condensing from light radiation, from photons to stable particles and so on. Then it expands, and visualize this as a three-dimensional form, goes around and gets pulled back in upon itself into the black hole. This is a white hole and a black hole back to back. This is the gravitational collapse as galaxies are pulled in to the black hole and then re-emerge as energy again on another round to go around and around again. And each time matter goes around, it gets refined. Its consciousness is on the next rung of the spiral. This is where Ben would place our galaxy, the Milky Way galaxy, because quasars were found off the true galactic pole in the south. In other words, he said, we may be looking straight back into the jet here, whereas the other side showed the quasars further away and moving faster. That means that they were entering this expansion where matter is rarefied and goes around. Now, if we equate matter with consciousness, and as I said before, there is nothing but consciousness, and matter is only a form in which consciousness appears. So in that case, the expansion that our galaxy is now entering, the expansion of matter, could also mean the expansion of consciousness. And this could explain, perhaps, why we are experiencing a certain change in consciousness on this planet. This would be the core of that torus structure. The white hole through which energy emerges, condenses, becomes matter, goes around, gets pulled back into the black hole. And between them is what might be called the singularity point. In physics, it's a situation where laws no longer apply. And here, a transmutation occurs of matter that has condensed to an extreme, and it becomes energy again to re-emerge as a new universe. So one could say that there are several phases to this trip of matter around the torus. Phase one, from energy to matter through expansion. The ultimate expansion is at this point. Then there is condensation and finally a gravitational collapse where the gravitational pull is such that even photons can't escape to tell the story. That's why it's a black hole. As you recall, we talked about the interference pattern of information, which is the hologram. Remember that every speck of matter on the surface of this torus is sending out information about itself. Our galaxy does, and so does a galaxy and many other galaxies which have gone ahead of us. so that the information that is being sent out gets interwoven into one web of information about the entire structure. This is the information that one can tap in those higher states of consciousness and, in fact, enter the knowledge that's available about the entire structure, because we are a part of this hologram, that little sliver that still retains some of that information. And by tuning into the totality of the hologram, we can have the information about every part of it. And that's exactly what Ben did. Again, the analogy between the macro level and the micro level. This is very similar to the ordinary chicken egg in shape. So what Ben did was to take a chicken egg and attach electrodes to the two ends of it and see if there was any current there. And lo and behold, there was a certain potential there of 2.4 millivolts, very small and yet there. So there is a field around every seed and every egg in nature that we know. In other words, there seems to be the same pattern in this egg as there is in this large torus. So nature tends to repeat a certain design. As an engineer, Ben dealt with structures, and he said there are certain elegant solutions to the problem. So hologram certainly is one for storing information, and this structure seems to be another one that is repeated on different levels. So here is our white hole and black hole and matter circulating round and around. In the center, it's hollow, and it's an electromagnetic field. And we could say that this interference pattern of information could be called the universal mind hologram. And also, the concept of time enters here, because it takes time for matter to go around and for energy in the form of photons, light energy, to become matter. So time becomes a factor of distance of energy as it issues from the white hole and goes around, because time exists when there is motion and where there is mass. So that this is linear time from here to there, one round. This is the birth of time, and this is the death of time. But seen from outside, as we're looking at it now from another dimension, we see that this is a continuum, and we're looking at it from perhaps an eternal point of view, so that this linear time is a very limited phenomenon in the scheme of things. And it is the force of evolution again that keeps driving this along. And Ben used to say that the torus is a distilling column of consciousness, that this structure actually is refining consciousness, which is equivalent to matter, as matter is recirculated through this black and white hole. There is a field like that around the human body, and the different frequencies interact, creating nodes. And also, medicine is moving into a new field, new energy medicine or vibrational medicine. The body is seen as a field of interacting electromagnetic or electric fields. And a new medicine is really emerging. So now we will look at Ben's personal experience through those higher levels of creation. And these he described in his book, which he called a cosmic book on the mechanics of creation. As I said before, he saw things in terms of structure. So, on that journey into the expanded states of consciousness, it's like a guided tour. You can ask questions and you get answers. And once you understand and you say, okay, I got it, The slide changes, the page is turned, and you're shown new things. So he asked, well, I've seen that model of the universe. In fact, he did perceive it in an expanded state. And then he started figuring out what it's all about. So having seen it, he said, well, it looks like a bounded structure. There must be something beyond it. I want to know. The moment the question is asked, his consciousness finds itself in this vastness of the infinite void, and the process is shown and explained to him. In the vastness of the dark void, a certain part becomes activated. This is where action will take place. And a light describes a certain territory. He called it proto-matter. This is a matrix which will be eventually filled with matter, like the Chinese checkers, which get filled with those little marbles. And this field begins to polarize. As we saw before, the field, the ultimate field of the absolute, which the void is reconciling the opposites. So the opposites of the plus and minus are together. So they begin to separate, and it's like unscrambling scrambled eggs. And the tension is enormous because they don't really want to be separated and they want to come back together again. But this is what creates the dynamics of manifest creation, because you need the polarization in order for action to occur. So what happens next is this. As the two ends want to come together, there is finally a tremendous pull, and one side reaches the other, and a sound actually fills creation. This is the sound, the first word, that creates different frequencies of vibration, and they begin to interact within this structure, and a certain current gets established and starts going around. Then there is a secondary sound, and a droplet is left in the middle. This becomes the focal point of this structure. And this is the white and black hole that we saw before. This is the consciousness whose body this is. The matter of this torus is like an oak tree in relation to the acorn. This center here, the black-white hole, is the consciousness that has the blueprint for this structure, and it's learning through the interaction of its parts, through all the particles that go around and get refined, and their consciousness is getting higher and higher each time around. This point grows in the process, it evolves. And what would you call a consciousness that is in charge of the universe? What is a consciousness whose body the universe is? And as Ben said, well, you would call it a creator. And he didn't know whether to call it a he or a she. He would say, you can't say it's a chairperson of the universe, but it is the creator of the universe who is evolving by experiencing his body in this way. Well, once you have seen this, you want to know more about it, because again, this is a bounded structure, so there must be more. And we, with our finite mind, cannot grasp infinity or eternity, so we want to see what's next. And so the moment you ask, again, the next picture is shown to you and explained. And what you see are more such luminous toroidal shapes appearing in the void, and as you approach, you see that they are arranged in a spiral, 7 universes per each rung of the spiral. This seems like a lot to take in at first, and you begin to count and you realize that there are 7 rungs to the spiral, which means that there are 49 universes. And on top of that structure, there appears to be a very luminous something, and as you approach it closer, this brilliant white light seems to have a shape such as this. And Ben, being familiar with the Hebrew language, looked at that and he said, no, I must be programming myself. This looks like the Hebrew letter Aleph, the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And immediately the explanation comes. No, this is not a Hebrew letter. This is an interference pattern of four energies interacting on this level, on this cosmic level. And they create this pattern, which is a consciousness whose body this is. This consciousness contains the consciousnesses of all the 49 creators. In other words, consciousness is modular. As we saw before with the ducks, a more evolved consciousness, a larger consciousness, will contain the lesser ones. As Ben was looking at all these things, he said, I'm just a tourist. I'm snapping pictures and bringing them back. I don't know what I'm looking at. And I'm just one of you all. We're all on this cosmic journey on a bus, except some of us have window seats and some have aisle seats. I happen to have a window seat, so I can share with you what I'm observing. So he had no explanations for these except that he was seeing something and then asking questions. So as he approached this Aleph a little closer, what he saw was that the front of it was a brilliant white light, and the back was dark, and it looked rather three-dimensional. It's a hologram. And there are 22 such forms, interference patterns, emerging from the luminous side, and they look exactly like the Hebrew letters. And he was explained again that these are interference patterns that were observed by seers in antiquity, and they incorporated them into the Hebrew letters, into the Hebrew alphabet, but they are there objectively to be observed. On the other side, the same forms emerge, but in a random, mixed-up order. And he was explained that these interference patterns are transducers of the Aleph energy down to the physical level. They step it down further and further to the physical level. And this whole diagram actually illustrates the law of the cosmic level, because what it's really saying that evil is simply ignorance of the law. The proper sequence of these characters is knowledge of the law, but a mixed up order is ignorance of the law, which then becomes evil. And what is the law? And when you ask the question, you're shown. Close up, this is the structure. The Aleph breaks itself down into 3 centers, 3 chakras, each one having these interference patterns in them, which look like Hebrew letters, and each Hebrew letter has an equivalent numerical value, so that everything is actually modular and structured. Each center has its own frequency in terms of color. The center, which is love, Yah, is gold. The center representing the will, Kol, is blue, and the center representing the creation is pink. When Ben looked at that, he realized that the white light of the Aleph representing wisdom is a combination of all these colors. And these are actually frequencies active on that level which create these holograms. Now, the law that we talked about before, the cosmic law operative on this level, is interpreted in a very ingenious way. These characters, which then became the Hebrew language, can be read in different directions and mean opposite things. If you read from left to right, it reads Heilech, which means go, or it's a green light. In other words, you can act safely if you act from love towards will. But if you act from will to love, self-will, before you know love, then it reads klaya, and in Hebrew it means destruction or extinction. So that is the cosmic law. The cosmic law is love, and the ignorance of the cosmic law then causes destruction. And the creative center, read in opposite directions, means in the beginning there was the desire for life. Having seen this, you want to see the entire structure, and this is what you see. The Aleph and his 49 creators is enclosed in a sphere very similar to a biological cell. And in fact, it's like a DNA coil, and it does split at the end when this unit is mature. So, having seen this and the current constantly circulating around this, you want to break out and you want to see what's beyond that. But you keep bumping into this wall and you can't get out. When finally you do break through, this is what you see. You are surrounded by more cosmoses, and they're pressing against each other like frogs' eggs. And you're caught in this structure. It looks like a biological structure. So, again, you want to know where it's all leading you, and you go through this structure, and this is what you find. There is a term in biology, close-packed structure. In other words, if you take a cell, you can only put 6 of the same size around it. And on top of that, you can only fit 3 so that they would be stable. And on top of that, only 1. So that from the side view, it will appear like this. It will be 1 on top of 3 on top of 7. And it will look like a pyramid with a triangular side on all sides, which is called tetrahedron. Now, what's interesting about that is that in physics, there is something known as fine structure constant, and it is 137. It is a method which demonstrates how atoms differ from each other. It determines the size of an atom because it determines the tension and the interaction between the electron and the nucleus. So it's interesting to note that the first stable structure on the cosmic level is a tetrahedron, and we, on our physical plane here on Earth, have the diamond, which is the strongest substance we know, and it has a tetrahedral molecular structure. So there is perhaps a resonance here with the cosmic level, and that's why the diamond is the strongest substance we know. And then these units of tetrahedrons form modules of 2 such tetrahedrons joined together, and this is how that field of cosmoses, the frog's eggs, is formed. Once you break out of that soup of cosmoses, you discover that they are contained in turn in a yet larger sphere, so that one structure is within another. And as you examine it closer, you see that in the center of this, perhaps you should call it supercosmos, there is a hollow. And inside that, cosmos shells are being formed, and they emerge from that and evolve towards the surface, whereas the Aleph's spiral has all those universes on the spiral evolving up towards the Aleph. So here, the cosmoses in turn evolve towards the surface of the supercosmos. And the mature cosmoses then emerge on the outside. They begin to cluster together and form a new supercosmos, and they kind of elbow there with a growing, almost biological structure. Now, on every level of these structures that you perceive, there is a consciousness in charge. The Aleph was in charge of the cosmos. And here on the level of the supercosmos, this form appears. And in order for you to know that it's a consciousness that you can interact with, a face or a likeness of a face will appear in it and say, I can talk to you. And in order to understand what it's saying, you merge with it, and then you begin to understand a little more about that level. And here I would like to digress a little bit to talk about consciousness, because there appear to be two types of consciousness. One that is the consciousness of the structure itself, and the other that uses that structure as a temporary dwelling. If we look at our own bodies, and for example, we talk to the cell of our kidney, and we ask the kidney cell, what is it that you do? What is your job here? The kidney cell will say, I don't really know. I'm just a little fellow here. Why don't you ask the boss? Now, who is the boss? It's the sum total of all the cells of the kidney. And it already is a consciousness that you can interact with. And the kidney will tell you, well, I purify blood, I do this and I do that. And so every organ in our body is a sum total of the consciousnesses of the cells that compose it. And then there appears to be a consciousness which is the sum total of all the consciousnesses of all the organs. And you could say that it's perhaps a rudimentary consciousness, if you can call it that, of the body. It runs the body when it is unconscious. In other words, the other consciousness is away. When you sleep, when you are under anesthesia, there's somebody running your body. Somebody is breathing. The lungs know what they're doing. The heart continues to pump blood. It is conscious, and it's unrelated to the consciousness that is temporarily away. So the same thing happens on every level. There is a consciousness of the structure itself and another one that uses that structure and can come and go. So we can also say the same thing about our Earth, for example. It's a conscious being, and there is a consciousness that runs the planet. Its electromagnetic field, its temperature, its currents, and other things, the ecology of the planet. And then there must be another consciousness which uses it as a garage, as Ben used to put it. And it can come and go. It's a much larger consciousness. And so it's true of the sun and of every other level as you go up. So Ben perceived these consciousnesses as abstract forms that would appear on different levels, and they would communicate with you, and you can learn from them. We saw this on the supercosmic level. Then comes the Ankh, the cross, the two triangles, the two crossing, and then something that looks a little bit like the Egyptian pharaoh, the first human form that runs the seventh level. There were 7 levels in all, and each level ever simpler, ever larger, and comprising the levels that were below it. As I said, consciousness is modular. So, as you go through all these levels, finally, you come to a level where all these levels are contained in one sphere, the manifest creation. Everything visible and invisible, everything that ever existed is in it. And around it is this infinite dark void, which is the consciousness itself. And as it vibrates, as we saw before, it creates manifest creation. So as you come closer to this, you begin to discern what appear to be rotating discs covering its surface. And as you look closer, this is what you see. Instead of discs, you see that these are bars having little shapes underneath like that. And these bars spin around. These shapes spin around. And there are 3 layers of these. And the 4th, the outermost layer, looks like this. And you begin to recognize these as shapes known as the Sanskrit letters, and then this one as the symbol which stands for Om, or cosmic consciousness in Sanskrit. So again, you're explained when you ask about it, these are not Sanskrit letters. These are holograms, interference patterns that are active on that level, and they were perceived by the seers and incorporated into the Sanskrit alphabet. So, as you look at this manifest creation, you realize that there must be a consciousness that runs this, the ultimate consciousness. And you want to understand how this structure is run and what's happening with these rotating disks. And you are explained that as this cell or as this being grows, and we saw that it's constantly expanding and developing and evolving, it expands into the surrounding void, which is pure consciousness, as we remember. So that as it expands into it, the void begins to penetrate it. And these rotating disks are acting as modulators of the void. And by rotating, they create a sound, the word of creation, which then begins to interact within itself. It's a hologram of sound, or a hologram of different frequencies that begin to create all kinds of harmonics and all kinds of additional sounds that develop out of these interactions of different frequencies. And so the whole thing is forever evolving. So then you ask, so who is the top God? Who runs this structure? And the moment you ask, you find yourself in the infinite void, and suddenly a brilliant light comes down on you, so brilliant that you're blinded and you're shaking, because now you realize you are talking to the ultimate God of the structure. So what do? You peek under and you realize that this is a tunnel of light. So you enter that and you begin to ascend, and you go faster and faster. And in fact, you begin to tumble down faster and faster. And then you realize that it's making a U-turn. And at the end, there is something there. And you know that that is it. And you will soon be confronting the God of manifest creation. As you finally look at it, you realize that you are looking at yourself, a carbon copy of yourself. But that self sits there paying no attention to you, and you're lost. You don't know what to say to yourself. How's the weather up there? What do you say to yourself? So, you revert to your old tested trick. You merge with yourself so that by merging, you can know yourself and you can find out what it's all about. So, you turn around and you slowly back into yourself like into a tight garage. And when you finally do, what happens is that there is a tremendous bang and you become the void. Because you are the consciousness, which is the void. And that part of you that had never left has always been the void. And that observer that was watching through your eyes and guiding you through this obstacle course to go back to yourself, your higher self, was the observer that had never left and was watching you creating this whole phantasmagoria for yourself. We each create our own. And it's just a trip back home to reunite with your own self. And so we could say that we are the creators, the producers, and the consumers of our own reality, because we are the consciousness itself. And Ben liked to finish his talks by quoting a poem by an Indian sage, Shankara, which went like this. On the vast canvas of the self, the picture of manifold worlds is painted by the self itself. And that supreme self, seeing but itself, enjoys great delight.